most boomers and Xers that I've spoken to, and I sort of am bordering on both of those generations, would typically say, well, surely the millennials, the Gen Zs, they want work-life balance, they want flexibility, they want to work for companies with a purpose, they want to work for companies that have ping pong tables in their reception. No. What they want is money.
Welcome to the Creative Agency Account Manager podcast. I'm Jenny Plant, and I'm on a mission to help account managers understand the agency business and develop an entrepreneurial mindset in their role so they can show up as a commercially aware advisor to their clients rather than a reactive order taker. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Brian Jacobs and Crispin Reed. They've come today to talk about what's wrong with the advertising industry. And in fact, they share with me the initiative that they've started, which is called Who Cares? And today we talk about lots of different aspects. We talk about what's actually wrong with the industry itself, a bit about the industry and how Brian came up with the idea in the first place, launched the idea, and how much attention it's attracted, and how many people have voluntarily agreed to be part of this movement, and then what happened at the event, and Brian and Crispin's thoughts on what comes next, what the so what factor. So I'm delighted to welcome them both to share their whole story with me. Welcome to you both.
Absolutely. Hi, and thank you very much indeed for inviting me. So I started in the ad industry sort of back in the sort of Neolithic period, I think probably. I was a messenger in an ad agency at the end of the 1960s.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to diving into the questions. Crispin, let's come to you. Welcome. And can you tell us a bit about your background as well?
Thank you again, Jenny, for inviting me.
Pleasure.
My journey started straight after university. I actually did my dissertation in my final year on the deregulation of the London Stock Exchange, which dates me because that was in 86 and I graduated in 84. Joined the ad industry, and after a couple of years at other agencies, then had my most formative time, 13 years out of the 20 I was in ad agencies at Leo Burnett working. And then my last job in advertising was running the London operation of German ad agency Springer & Jacobi. I then went client side, then into consultancy, and for the last 8 years I've worked for myself.
I'm keen to get into the initiative. So Brian, you what was the spark for you that started this whole initiative called Who Cares?
Okay, we were talking about the state of the media industry, and this is where it gets all a bit geeky, but it is quite important actually. So we talked about ad fraud, we talked about this thing called principle-based buying, which is agencies in effect broking ad space and then selling it on to their clients at an unknown markup. We talked about made for advertising sites and everything else. We were talking about all of this kind of stuff. And so we started talking about this and we thought, yeah, this is interesting because nowadays clients seem to be more interested or more concerned with understanding the number of people they're reaching rather than the messages they're putting in front of them. So it's almost like media has become old-fashioned media, audiences and things like related to audiences has become the critical element in any advertising campaign as opposed to the creative messaging. And we started talking about all this, and after a bit, one of us said, I wonder if this is just us. We're kind of out of it really these days. And so it all came from there. We can talk in a bit about what we did do about it. But we genuinely had no real idea other than we think things are wrong and we want to try and put them right.
And who was responding to you? I mean, obviously you had an audience that were following you much larger than you thought, but who were the first ones to say, actually, where were they working?
We had people in America, Australia, China, Singapore, and obviously here. And there was a very interesting thing that happened that we absolutely didn't predict at all. And that was that we said early on, look, if you want to support us and help us, we'll set something up, whatever that is, we'll set something up. And if you want, we can ensure that you remain anonymous. Okay. And we had quite a few people saying to us, I work for ABC Holding Company, XYZ Holding Company, but I don't want you to use my company email address. I'd rather remain anonymous and I would like you to deal with me privately. And so we've obviously we've respected that. And so we have quite a few people now. We've got about, I think it's 450, 460 people now who are in our supporter group, who have come from absolutely everywhere. And in terms of discipline, I mean, it's multidiscipline as well. So we had creative people, we had account people from agencies, we had researchers, we had consultants, we had vendors, all sorts of people.
How many people were actually agency owners? Did you have like independent agency owners, or were this more networked agencies with majority employees?
No, I would say a lot of them were independent. I don't know, I'm afraid. I mean, we sort of set this up, and of course now it's easy to look back and say, what I really should have done was start a proper spreadsheet, and
Yeah.
and I should
But
have
you
actually
didn't
noted where people came from and all that.
Yes.
But I didn't. But I did notice that there were quite a few people who I'd heard of who were independent agency owners, and some of them quite large independent agency owners as well.
So was this something, Brian, that when you started thinking, well, there's a huge amount of interest, how are we going to organise ourselves? Was this your thought on how we could sort of start to lift the lid maybe on the different areas?
We thought the thing to do is to focus in on 5 work streams. We could have frankly thought of 10, but we thought, let's just keep this to 5 things we feel strongly about. And the 5 things, if I get them in the right order, were business models, from which, of course, everything sort of flows, really. Something we called trading, transparency, and trust. Then we had measurement and accountability. We had recruitment and well-being, which obviously was Crispin. And we had something I felt very strongly about called brands and journalism. All of those are fairly self-evident. Maybe I'll just say a word about the brands and journalism one, because that's maybe not quite so self-evident. Because the point is that if you go along these days to sort of big advertising festivals or big conferences, a lot of the people speaking or sponsoring these events are people who have massive databases, right? Or their platforms, Facebook, Google, whoever it may be. And what these guys, of course, offer is an audience, a very, very large audience of people. But what they do not do is create any kind of content. I mean, even the platforms make the point of saying they're not publishers, they're platforms. So people write on them, but they themselves don't write or create anything, right? So they're creating the space for other people to create in that. And what was occurring to both of us was this is a big worry for journalism. And if you believe that journalism is really important in any kind of democratic society and it's a force for good, and don't let's get into what type of journalism or whatever, but just journalism per se, then if journalism itself is under threat, that is not a good thing. We had Michael Farmer, who we were talking about earlier, who headed the business models one, who literally wrote the book on the subject. We had Jenny Bigham, who's the owner of an agency called the 7 Stars, the biggest of the independent media agencies, heading the trading, trust and transparency one. We had Denise Turner, who's the CEO of a research business called Root, who does all the out-of-home measurement, do the measurement and accountability one. We had Crispin, obviously, doing recruitment and well-being. And we had a chap called Ruben Schreurs, who works for Ubiquity, the media consultancy, doing the brands and journalism. And we got a journalist to help him with that, the editor of a thing called Byline Times, a lady called Hardeep Mathuru. So those were our 5 work streams. And we then said, join whichever one you want. And I think some of them got a lot of people, some of them had fewer people. And then we decided that with the 5 work streams, we would sort of leaven it slightly by having sort of keynote speeches, if you like. So we had a keynote speech by a lady called Lucy Jameson, who heads a brilliant agency called Uncommon. And then we had our version of the Glastonbury Legends slot, which was David Weldon in discussion with John Hegarty. And that was called the Next Creative Revolution. So that's what we did.
Great. So everyone had a deadline. You knew how much you have a slot, and it was like go and find out. So Crispin, let's obviously dive into yours, recruitment and well-being. So how did you approach the task? And more importantly, I think for the listeners, they really want to get to what did people say to you? What was the feedback that you got?
So in terms of how I went about the task first, because of my connections in academia, various universities were very generous in opening their doors and giving me access to their students. It was entirely voluntary. Out of the 4 main themes, the most dominant theme, when I said, amongst everything else, what's driving your career choice? Now, most boomers and Xers that I've spoken to, and I sort of am bordering on both of those generations, would typically say, well, surely the millennials, the Gen Zs, they want work-life balance. They want flexibility. They want to work for companies with a purpose. They want to work for companies that have ping pong tables in their reception. No. What they want is money, which may come as a bit of a surprise. And don't get me wrong, all those other things did come into the conversation. But as I say, over an hour and a half, once you start to strip it away, why is money the most dominant thing? And it's perfectly logical. Number one, those that are students who are at university or indeed contemplating going to university, which is not all of them. There were sixth forms I spoke to who said maybe degree apprenticeship, maybe I'm going to go straight out to work. They know that they're going to be carrying a lot of student debt. If they're doing masters, they may be up to the 60, 80K mark. An undergraduate might typically be coming up 40K. So they know they're going to have a lot of debt. And okay, they understand they're not going to have to necessarily repay that depending on what their salaries are, depending on the length of time of their careers. So there's that. Secondly, every day they're hearing about the cost of living crisis. You can't avoid it, either on a micro scale, i.e. they hear it at home, or switch on the telly, there's a politician, there's the media, journalists talking about it. Thirdly, and this wasn't all the students, but it was a proportion, and if you go back to 2022, ONS statistics say 42% of marriages ended up in divorce. Quite a few of them have experienced divorce in their homes, and the financial fallout of that, in addition to, of course, the emotional fallout. So there's that. Fourth reason is redundancy. All of them had experienced redundancy either in their close family, i.e. mums or dads, or in their kind of circulating families, our uncles, aunts, grandparents, whatever. So they understand that's a reality. And then lastly, they're saying, don't talk to me about buying a home. I'm not even sure I can afford to rent a home. So I spoke to students who are at northern universities who are from London saying, I probably won't return to London because I can't afford to. Now, when you consider that the average salary, I'm led to believe from doing research in advertising agencies, and I say advertising agencies in the broadest definition, digital media, the agency world, in London is possibly between 25, 28K. That's going to be tough to live off on your own. And then you put that into a competitive environment where you've got law firms maybe starting their graduates on 58, 60, 65. Eversheds, about 3 weeks before the conference that Brian and Nick organised, announced that their newly qualified lawyers were going to be paid £100,000. And I'm assuming they're sort of 2 or 3 years out of university. Now, of course, not every student is going to get that type of job. Not every student wants that type of job. So you can start to understand some of the systemic issues. How can the ad industry actually afford to employ these people or attract these people when you've got that? Now, conversely, the civil service may not be as well paid as the law firms or investment banks, but crucially, what they are perceived to offer is stability and security.
So two really important pieces of the puzzle. The business model is broken, and also the effect that that's having on the reputation of the industry in general, particularly when it comes to students coming through, not even considering it because the money's not there. What else for you both was the kind of the revealing moments from all of the work streams that presented their findings?
I think there was the other word that I would choose to use that came through singing out from absolutely everything that everybody said was trust and lack of. And I would use trust to mean two things here. It's not only trust in how consumers perceive advertising, and the famous quote that Crispin used from one of his undergrads was, I think it was something like, "Why would I join an industry that bombards me with rubbish?" So trust amongst consumers, but also very importantly, and I think these things are connected as well, trust between agency and advertiser and agency. And because I think there's been a decline in the trust that agencies are held in by their clients, for all sorts of reasons. I think that has affected everything. I think that we're far too quick. It's almost like you change an agency like as often as you change your shirt these days. It's ridiculous. The number of pitches going on is mad. The degree of the sort of commoditization of the whole industry is a bad thing. And so what we've done is we just keep producing 300 and whatever it was that Michael said, outputs per year of, frankly, not very good stuff.
By probably junior staff that aren't getting paid very much.
Exactly. And they're
so
just churning it out.
More and more.
They're just churning it out. And then someone goes, oh, yeah, we got lots of clicks. And lots of people saw it. And you go, okay, let's just stop there for a minute. Lots of people. No. You had lots of clicks. Those clicks are not necessarily anything to do with people.
Yeah. And
they're bots. They're ad fraud. There's all sorts of stuff. Again, it's all connected. So all the metrics you're running around chasing and thinking you're being very clever because you've bought gazillions of gonzos on Facebook or something or Google or whatever it is, they're not necessarily anything to do with people or anything to do with people going out and buying your product or thinking differently about your brand.
When I joined the industry in the 80s, yes, it was a tool of capitalism. You understood that. But people almost forgave it because at least it entertained and informed. Now it doesn't do that. And in the research groups, I closed each of them by saying, okay, can you tell me an ad you remember today? Forget yesterday, today. No recollection. And it's not the water cooler moment. It's not the going to work the next morning and chatting about what did you see. Advertising doesn't hold that place in society. And it was brought home to me by one student who was a graphic design student, gone on a field trip to Barcelona. And she said she was really looking forward to going to see the Sagrada Familia, the Basilica. Turned the corner, and there it was, and I found a photo which I shared in my presentation. Samsung, who had sponsored the renovation, or part sponsored the renovation of the Basilica, had slapped a massive poster for one of its phones, I think, on the front of the Basilica. This is a beautiful piece of architecture. And the student said, it was sacrilegious, both literally and metaphorically. And she used that as the epitome of what's wrong in advertising. So creativity for me was the big aha. Great to see some examples that reassure me there is still creativity, but overlay that with the feedback from the students I spoke to, put aside the money, they're going, well, why would I want to do this? And indeed, the opening slide that I shared with the presentation was a quote from 3 different students in 3 different settings and conversations, which was, there is no skill in advertising. Yeah. And that's a sad indictment because there is skill in it. Different skill maybe now.
In terms of solutions, Crispin, particularly with your work stream, what were some of the more positive elements coming out of that? What could we do about?
So I presented 10 ideas. They weren't my ideas. They were ideas from the horse's mouth, the students themselves. A couple stand out to me. One is a couple of students in different conversations said, oh, the army advertising, that's quite good, or has been quite good in the past, because it's talked about the variety of jobs that you can do in the army. It's not just about being a soldier. You can be a medic, an engineer, an air traffic controller, for the RAF, all sorts of things. Maybe the advertising industry could talk more about the variety of roles, because we, the students, just see it as basically somebody creating the ads, but there's a lot more to it. So that was interesting. The second one that stood out for me was plays to this idea of security and stability. And don't get me wrong, we all know, particularly in this day and age, how unstable careers are. And redundancy is almost, if you haven't been made redundant at some point in your career, you haven't had a career. But they said, maybe there's an opportunity to bring to the fore people in agencies who've been there a long time. Because there are people who have been in some agencies a long time, and celebrate or promote the fact that they've worked their way up through the various levels to get to where they are today. And not just talk about those, talk about the client relationships, and Brian and I, Leo Burnett, like a lot of the big multinational agencies, enjoyed and still enjoy long-standing relationships with clients. Why not put that forward? Because that's a symbol of the stability of the environment in which you're working.
I think there were good ideas across the work streams. Before we actually even started doing this, I went round and spoke to a couple of people in smaller independent agencies, media agencies. As I said, that's my world. And somebody said to me, I won't name them because it might be embarrassing, but somebody had an absolutely brilliant idea. I thought they said, a couple of years ago, we wanted to provide an opportunity for people from out of London universities to come to London, and it's very expensive, and we don't have offices anywhere else, they said. So it's, in our case, it's London or nothing, and we wanted to encourage people to come. And so a few of us in different agencies, all independent agencies, got together, and we thought we'd start a bursary scheme, right? So we each put in an amount of money, we thought, and we would encourage people from out of London universities to come to London, and we would pay. Let's say we paid for their accommodation for, say, a year, whatever it was at the time. And if you got this bursary, you then spent your year going around, say, 3 or 4 different agencies, and you did different skills, you learned different things. And at the end of that time, you were in a good place, hopefully, to get a job, right? That was the idea. And I said, it's a brilliant idea. Did you ever do it? And she said, no, we didn't do it. And we didn't do it, she said, only because we just got busy, We just got busy. But there's ideas like that floating around.
Was there any statistic that was shared about the consumption of mainstream media or the consumer's kind of viewpoint on mainstream media? Because obviously there's been a bit of a proliferation of different...
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone actually presented that, but we know that is obviously a point. But if you take, I would push back slightly on that, because if you take the average advertising campaign at the moment online, and I asked you, how many sites do you think that appears on? How many sites do you think an average or a large online campaign would use? Yeah, it's in the tens of thousands, right? If you take the number of people reached, I say people, and I mean people reached, you don't need that number of sites to reach that number of people. You can buy campaigns in a very specific way, aimed at very specific audiences, and you don't need quite as much coverage just because it's there. Well, you better buy it because it's there. You don't need to do that. You can still reach a lot of people using even using just offline media. You can still reach a lot of people, let alone the power and the influence of the online channels. So you don't need to be quite as spray and pray is the expression that's used. You don't need to do quite as much spraying and praying. You can be a bit more selective and a bit more precise, and you can save yourself a great deal of money by not advertising in places where the audience is frankly non-existent, or if it is existent, it's also seeing other things as well.
Yeah. For both of you, I know we've got to wrap it up, Crispin, but I'd just love to ask you finally, for you, what would be an ideal outcome? Obviously, we've just had the event. It's early days. You're kind of assimilating all the information that you've gathered. What for you would be an ideal outcome in, say, 3 years' time of what the industry looks like?
I think from the perspective of the work stream I led, it's really straightforward. It's that the advertising industry is seen as we saw it, a vibrant career path, long-term career path. And, at the risk of looking backwards, the thing that, yes, ultimately ended up getting paid well, which was great, ended up traveling the world, living abroad, fabulous, money can't buy that, but also working with really stimulating variety of people, not all graduates. My first boss had a degree in Byzantine architecture, but stimulating minds. So I think very simply, it's appreciated, particularly by the next generation of talent coming through. It's appreciated as a career path that is long, varied, and exciting.
All right. Thank you so much, Crispin. So, Brian, for you, if what's an ideal outcome of all of this work? Because it takes commitment, it takes energy. You've achieved so much in such a short period of time.
Well, we've done an event.
But you did all the thinking.
We did all
you
the
did
thinking
the work
behind the event.
streams.
We did. But it won't count for very much if we just then, as some people have implied, they would quite like us to just sort of go away, just disappear. So you ask what would a good outcome be? I mean, we both started and we wrote down very early on what we care about. And I suppose at the bottom of it all is the phrase that we really care about advertising being seen as and being a force for good in all kinds of ways. So it's a force that can build business. It's a force that can actually build brands and create employment and all those sorts of things. It's a force for good in the sense that it can fund responsible media, and create a tremendous sort of diversity of editorial options, and that feeds back into more advertising, which then funds more media forms and so on. So I think we would like to think that advertising could be a force for good. So you then start to look at what's been sort of going wrong, because you've got to start there really. And I suppose it's this obsession with the short term in every sense. And I appreciate, of course, short term promotions and advertising and everything, of course, has a role. Of course it does. And it's not black or white. It's always a blend of things, isn't it, that you put together that build you great brands and build you, great advertising campaigns that then build great brands. But I think we've gone so far towards the short term and we've forgotten about the sort of longer term in every sense, not just longer term brand building, but also longer term relationships. I mean, Crispin referenced it earlier, longer term relationships between agencies and clients.
We were talking about earlier, if you've got generally the quality of the people that are working in advertising is perhaps more junior level, which the clients are seeing and they're not getting the results as a result of these junior people. The quality isn't there. It's you said something quite profound, that Michael Farmer said this is a business model thing. Let's talk a bit about pricing, because if we're not earning enough in the first place, we can't afford to hire the right people at the right level with the right experience. They will be working on 3,000 pieces of collateral a year rather than 3 in the olden days. There's obviously a balance there. We've got the procurement, which is there as well, which are protecting clients. Talk to me about the business model itself and pricing specifically. What do you think the answer is?
Well, I think I mentioned before the 7 Stars and the way in which they go about doing it. And they're very open and transparent about it. I did some work, and it wasn't on advertising per se, it was on market research, actually, a few years ago for the advertisers, for ISBA, the advertisers trade body. And one of the things that we did was to talk to advertisers and advertiser procurement heads about their choice and their the way in which they selected market research agencies. And I appreciate that's not quite the same, but it's not. There is an obvious parallel. It's a similar sort of thing. And I remember it really struck me. There was one very, very large advertiser. Indeed, it was one of the big financial services. It was a bank, one of the really big banks. And I sat down with a guy who was head of marketing procurement or some such title. And he said, we use XYZ number of market research agencies. They all do slightly different things. And I would really encourage you to go and talk to this particular one down in Maidenhead. He said, I refer to them as our very expensive market research agency. So I went to see these people and I said, what's your secret? Because you're obviously getting paid properly. And they said, it's absolutely, completely rooted in utter transparency. So what we've done, and we spoke to them and we took them through the books and we said, here's how much you pay us. Here's what we do with the money. Here's what happens, And the bank or the procurement person said, well, we want to pay less. We're paying you too much. And they said, certainly, you can absolutely pay us less. Absolutely. And here's the consequence of you paying us less. Because at the moment you've got person A, B, and C. Those people are heading your account. If you pay us less, you won't have person A, B, and C because we've just shown you the books. You know what they're being paid. You know the margins we're making. You'll get person D, E, and F. That's the way it will be. And the bank said, no, but we really like A, B, and C. And they said, well, you can't have A, B, and C. You're not paying for them. It's like anything else. So we would have to downscale the people that you have working on your business. That's how it will be. And the bank said, no, but we love the work they do and we really value them. He said, well, you've got to pay for them. That's it, And I think that's sort of gets a bit sort of forgotten. And where it's got forgotten, and I remember I speak as a media guy, is through my ex-colleagues, people like me in the media industry, who've said, yes, well, okay, no, we'll give you person D, we'll give you person A, B, and C, but we'll only charge you D, E, and F's rates for them, for those people. And don't worry about it. We'll make the money somewhere else. Don't worry about it. And that's where it's gone wrong, in my opinion.
So there's people trying to undercut each other because the need for the business. I mean, what's your view on the quantity of agencies that are now available to clients, where you use the word commodity?
Well, I do feel we probably have got too many agencies. It's a buyer's market, isn't it? But on the other hand, you sort of think that any industry, any service industry like this is, it needs influxes of new entrepreneurs and new ways of doing things. And I mean, we mentioned Lucy a couple of times in Uncommon. I mean, they're an agency that they also design furniture. They do all sorts of things. They create tote bags. They've done all sorts of different things, not just ads. But one of the examples that Lucy showed, and I would really, by the way, on our site you can see all the presentations. They're all there on YouTube. All of them are there. If you want to see a outstanding demonstration of creativity and what it means and the craft of creativity, just spend half an hour watching Lucy's deck. But one of the things that she showed was some work she did, or the Uncommon did, for I think their client was a mental health charity. I may be wrong about that, but I think it was. And they convinced ITV to run what they called I suppose it was a promotion, really, to, in quotes, get Britain talking. That was the idea. And what they did was they persuaded ITV to pause the final of Britain's Got Talent for 2 minutes or 1 minute, whatever, I forget the length of time. And during that pause, you were encouraged to turn and talk to people. You probably remember it. That was Uncommon's idea. Well, I'm sure it was Uncommon's idea. And it was astonishingly successful. It was a brilliant idea. It made news headlines. It was all over the papers. It created a whole sense of the importance of mental health and conversation, to encourage people to talk about their issues and to, connect with people through conversation and so on. Brilliant. Absolutely outstanding. Not an ad.
Mm-hmm. So that quality of creative thinking is, it's unfortunately it's a rarer thing nowadays, isn't it? Brian, I'm conscious of time and I'd love to wrap things up. But from your perspective, if you've got people listening to this thinking, actually, I feel as passionately as Brian and Crispin do, and I'd love to get involved, what advice would you give to anyone that's listening to this that kind of wants to join the cause or contribute or indeed talk to you?
Yeah, first of all, we set up, I should have mentioned this earlier because it's slightly rude of me not to have done, but right from the beginning, we were encouraged by a few companies that said to us, we absolutely believe in this and we will support it. So one of them, for example, was a New Zealand-based web organization called Blue Tui. And Blue Tui built us a website. And then they've created the website and they've created the content on the website and they've hosted the website. They've done all that for free, right? We had 7 Stars, I mentioned a couple of times already because Jenny was leading a work stream, but the 7 Stars have got a design arm and they created a logo for us in various different shapes, sizes, certain typefaces and one thing and the other. And they did that for free. We had a PR agency called The Digital Voice, Julia Linehan's company. They provided us with not only PR support, but also people on the day to help with the actual event for free. We had Thinkbox put together a sizzle reel for us for free. Everybody did stuff because they believe in this. We had people in the sizzle reel from Jonathan Mildenhall, through to Bob Hoffman, people like Pete Markey, who's the current president of ISBA, as well as being the marketing director of Boots, Andrew Stevens, who heads Good Stuff, one of the founders of Good Stuff, Tess Alps, Karen Stacey, all these sorts of people made us little videos saying, well, I care about this. So we've got a lot of people who care. And what we really encourage people to do is to look at our website. It's advertising. It's www.advertisingwhocares.org. And we're in the process of, I apologize for the copy being a bit out of date. I haven't got around to rewriting it yet. There's still a bit going on about the event. But anyway, on there's a form. And you just put your name and your email address and whether you want to remain anonymous. The form comes to me. I add you to the supporter list. It's absolutely free. And we just keep you in touch with everything that we're trying to do. And we're now at that stage where we need to really expand, I think, the reach. We've got 450 odd people on it. There's no reason, and Michael said on a podcast the other week with me that why isn't it 4,500 people or 45,000 people or 450? A lot of people care about this because if you explain to them the consequences of not caring about it, it's existential, isn't it? So do please join us, and do please, just fill out the form, and then we'll take it from there, and then you'll be kept in touch with everything. It won't cost you a penny, and hopefully, you'll be able to contribute to work streams or what we're now calling subject areas as we move forward, and help to actually try and rebuild or build a better advertising industry.
And this is open to absolutely anyone within
Absolutely
the industry.
Anyone. Yeah.
So any level, junior,
Any level.
senior, owner.
We've had people who are owners, some quite well-known owners, clients. We have got some clients. We had some clients who came along in September. We had people there from Vodafone, from Virgin Media, from Specsavers. I forget. There was quite a few clients who were there. We've got clients who are joining us, who've on the list on our 450 list. It can be absolutely anybody, and we've had some quite well-known independent advertising agency figures have joined us. The other thing is just to say that, when we started this, we wanted to put on this event. We approached 5 workstream leaders. Obviously, Crispin was one of them. And we approached John, David, and Lucy, and the Team Starling people, Pippa Glucklick and Rachel Carone, the client, and Jess Lovell, who's the creative agency. And nobody turned us down at any point. Everybody has done this for free. No one's been paid anything. We said that if we made any surplus, because we never put on an event before. We don't know about putting on events. So we costed it as best we could, and we thought, okay, we'll underwrite it. Nick and I underwrote it. If no one comes, it's going to be quite expensive. But we underwrote it, and we sold it out. And any surplus we made, we gave to NABS.
Amazing.
So NABS are very pleased with us because we gave them a nice check. But it's not about making us money or making us famous or any of the rest of it. We're a bit past all that. We want to try and leave the industry a slightly better place than it was when we joined it.
Well, I want to say a huge congratulations to you for initiating the idea, for bringing people together. You're onto something when you get such an immediate reaction from everybody that wants to contribute. And I suppose my next and final question is, so what's the best way? So go to the website, fill in your details, join the
we
list.
just need an email address, basically. We need an email address, name and an email address, and that's it. Or they can just, if people would rather get in touch with me directly, they can do that. If they'd rather not go on the site, or I'm sure if they contacted you, I'm sure you just pass it along, and
That's fine.
We'll add them to the list.
Great.
As I said earlier, we probably should have done this in a much more structured and organised fashion because we had no quite idea what was going to happen. Somebody said to me the other day, "How many people have you got in Asia?" And I said, "I have no idea." Quite a few. The first ticket we sold, by the way, when we put tickets on sale, the very first ticket was bought by somebody in Sydney. And this person came over for it. And the second ticket was bought by somebody in Shanghai, and she came over for it as well. So we've got people who are, okay, I'm sure they were doing other things as well, but they bought tickets and they traveled over from America, from Asia, from Australia, New Zealand to attend this. And it does seem as if people care. This
sounds like it's going to be huge. What's going to be the biggest challenge for you?
I don't know. Ask my wife. I mean, thought you'd kind of retired. Seriously, the biggest challenge is we have to deliver something. There has to be a thing of some sort that comes out of this. I do think that that we need to try and engage with and involve as many people as we can. Most of the comments we had back after the September thing were very positive indeed. No one, one or two people had a bit of a go at us saying, why wasn't it a more diverse speaker list? Why do you have so many people who are, white and male and stuff? In fact, we had half men, half women, by the way, on the speaker list. And all of that's true. And there is a point that if you're young and in this industry at the moment and you're working for a very successful social agency or something like that, why would you think there's anything wrong with the industry? I think to try and get as many people from all sorts of ages, backgrounds, diversity and everything else involved is what we need to try and do. And we are trying. Someone said to us, well, you didn't invite any of the platforms to contribute. And we said, we didn't invite anybody. We put tickets on sale. People bought them. If they didn't buy them, they didn't buy them. It's up to them. We can't run around doing that. And we wanted to do it without sponsorship, without any kind of pressure from anybody to put a particular point of view. And I think the challenge now, is to make it as far-ranging and as comprehensive a group as we can.
Well, Brian, finally, thank you so much for joining me and sharing the whole story. This is fascinating, and I'm sure this is just the first step in a longer journey.
Well,
so
thanks
you so
a lot
much.
I think spreading the word is what we're about. So we're delighted to have been asked, and thanks a lot for your time.
It's a pleasure, and I'll put all of the links into the show notes for the episode. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Brian and Crispin. And if you are working in the industry and you'd like to get involved in the movement, or perhaps you're curious to see what was presented at the launch event, then you can go over to the website advertisingwhocares.org. And finally, if you are working in agency account management and you'd like to receive regular updates about upcoming podcast episodes, tips to help you with your role in account management, and mini trainings that I'm running, then you can sign up for my regular newsletter at accountmanagementskills.com. And I look forward to chatting to you on the next one.